What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Ryan Moody, Jimmy Smith, our MMA Show, here to do something I don't know that we've ever done before. We're going to revisit the conversation. As promised, Jimmy and I went over the worst fighter of 2019, and you guys were very receptive to it. There were a few people that thought it was, an overly negative topic, which, listen, we're watching people knock each other out half the time, so I don't know how much more negative you can get. But I guess one of the things that we didn't make clear was this wasn't pick on somebody while they're down. This was who had poor fights in, I guess, competition with poor decision making more than anything else. So, I understand when people talk about James Vick or Luke Rockhold, those just never entered my mind because it's a bad competition. They didn't really make bad decisions. Is that how you felt too, Jimmy?
Not so much. And by the way, fans who commented on that, man, I appreciate you guys and gals. Because there were some smart responses and a lot of stuff I didn't think of necessarily.
Agreed.
So you know what I mean? But the thing for me was, and I explained this when we talked about, your pick was BJ Penn, mine was TJ Dillashaw. By the way, I want to give a big prize. I'm scrolling down, I'm looking at it right now. I'm scrolling down for this person's name because I want to call you out because you're awesome. Andy Kelsey. I got one. BJ Dillashaw.
I love that one.
I started laughing my ass off when I read that. I don't know why I thought it was so funny, but it's hilarious. So let's go over some of the things because you and I picked different fighters for different reasons. You could argue BJ Penn had perhaps the worst year ever, but my argument was I think the slide began a lot earlier in that year, 2019, was a continuation of a slide that had already begun. So the reason I picked Dillashaw was at the end of 2018, if you had told me he's going to be fighter of the year next year, that would have been a decent bet. All right. Yeah. And I'll bet on that. No problem. If you would have bet me he'll fight once, be disgraced and not fight for a couple of years, that would have been surprising. So the one pick that lined up with my logic that I didn't think about was Ben Askren. Now, the reason he wouldn't make my list, I mean, he'd be in my top 3 or 4 for sure. For sure.
Bad year. Yeah. You can't debate bad year.
Can't debate bad. He even retired. I mean, he's one of those guys who will, might never see again. And who knows about that? It's MMA. But I still felt he had a lot to prove. The win over Robbie Lawler, you've heard my opinion about it. I thought it was stopped too early. I felt he still had a lot to prove in the UFC and just didn't prove it. Now, it's a bad year, yeah, but I thought his potential. I wasn't as bullish on I got BJ Penn on the brain. I wasn't as bullish on Ben Askren in the UFC as a lot of people were. So I felt he still had more to prove and just didn't prove it. But TJ Dillashaw, it was on a trajectory that was up, and just suddenly crashed. But I thought Ben Askren was a good addition that I didn't think of.
Yeah, I mean, Ben had a bad year, but did Ben totally ruin his legacy? Personally, I don't think so. I think that, first of all, I think it's overlooked that Ben had already retired. This was a second retirement. He basically came into the UFC through a trade. He didn't live up to, first of all, his expectations. I don't know that his own personal expectations, which was wrestle through everyone, were ever going to be met. But to the same point that we had made in the prior video, if you told me in 6 months Ben Askren was going to go back to the PFL, I wouldn't balk at it the same way I would if TJ Dillashaw, who can't fight in the PFL, and, maybe BJ Penn, who could, but probably won't fight in the PFL, would. So I didn't put that same, you didn't really have a period at the end of the Ben Askren sentence the same way you would Dillashaw or with BJ Penn. Now, we kind of touched on James Vick and Luke Rockhold. Again, I mean, two guys. This wasn't who had the worst series of knockouts, right? Because they both certainly did. But again, they didn't really do anything personal outside the octagon that made me say, hey, got what was coming to him. And, like it or not, James Vick is still viable. If Luke Rockhold wanted to fight somewhere else, he could. His name is always going to carry some type of clout as a former champion. Is it going to mainline a UFC event? No. Is he going to find success elsewhere? We even mentioned this in modeling and other things that he wants to pursue. Absolutely. So did he have that tailspin that others did? However, I will say to that point, Jaden Stent brought up Renan Barão. And that's one that totally eluded me. Missed weight, got knocked out, tried to return, lost the decision, and then gets cut. Yeah, no, that's pretty bad. He wasn't even on my radar.
Yeah, but Renan Barão, for the reasons I stated earlier, I thought has been on a slide for a lot of years. He hasn't been the same guy since TJ Dillashaw wrecked him in their first fight. And once again, that has a big asterisk on it now. For James Vick, that's a guy who I think we had seen his ceiling, right? We had seen how far he was going to hit. Bad year for sure. For sure. Somebody mentioned David Branch. Once again, bad year. But we saw the ceiling on these guys. We kind of saw how far they were going to get. With James Vick, brash, talented, new guy on the scene, and just as soon as he got beat, especially the Justin Gaethje loss, I thought that really wrecked him. Because he put a lot emotionally behind that fight, a lot of trash talk. He really thought he was going to be the next big thing, and he got pasted. And I don't think he's ever mentally recovered from that. Renan Barão isn't the same guy he used to be, who, wrecked the 135-pound division. He hadn't been that guy for a long time, much like BJ Penn. I thought the fall had come a lot earlier than that. And so that's what great names who had bad years, for sure. But it was a trajectory we all could have predicted.
Yeah, to me, James Vick, more karma than anything else. Like you said, I mean, here's a guy
I love it. I hear your smile I hear it as you're saying it.
Karma of the year, James Vick. Yeah, probably never should have said the things you did about Justin Gaethje. You should have never made fun of him as if he was disabled, number one. And then, I hate to say it, kind of got what was coming to you. And then we actually mentioned this in a prior show. You have to upsell your opponent. If you sell somebody as the worst, and then you lose to them, well, then what have you done to yourself? So, when he was sitting there calling Justin Gaethje the B-side, minor leagues, AAA baseball, whatever, when you lose to him, guess what you just did? You put yourself beneath that. So, to me, yeah, I see how people would look at James Vick, but that really wasn't meeting all the standards that I had. As far as the other one, you mentioned David Branch. I mean, I could go either way. David Branch, again, I think his ceiling came outside of the UFC, came in, really did have the big draw with Luke Rockhold. But other than that, my expectations weren't high. And David Branch can still go fight elsewhere. One of the interesting ones, Mike Perry. Mike Perry did have a rough year, especially with that nose that he got readjusted. I guess maybe you could put him in. I would put him in the top 3 only because he was at a high level in terms of popularity. He went through some rough spots, and now I think general consensus is he could be on the way out because the entertainment Mike Perry brings isn't as viable when Mike Perry doesn't win fights.
Yeah, that's very true. I think Mike Perry is one of those guys who's just a one-dimensional brawler who is running into the brick wall that most of those guys run into. If you look at most next-level fighters, right, champions, perennial contenders, all-time greats, the one quality, and I get asked this sometimes, all the fights I've called and everything, what's the number one quality in terms of tactics and techniques that great fighters have? Great fighters tend to be versatile. If you look at the all-time greats, you look at the champions, they can do a lot of stuff well, or at least marginally well. The problem with Mike Perry is a step-forward brawler. That's great. That has entertainment value. It's not going to get you to the elite. And there's a certain point where you run into those guys and it's clear what level you're really on. So did Mike Perry have a bad year? Yes. I don't think Mike Perry is necessarily equipped to be an elite fighter. And it's just a matter of when he runs into that level, which apparently he has. Could rebound this year, as you said. And one of the things your pick about BJ Penn has over TJ Dillashaw, or, some of the other picks I've seen, once again, I don't want to see BJ Penn fight anywhere, anyone, at any time. I really want his career to be over. Renan Barão, I really want his career to be over. TJ Dillashaw, as you pointed out in the last recording, post-suspension, there are people who will pay to watch him fight. I'm willing to give the guy another shot if he's able to come back clean. BJ Penn, not so much. Renan Barão, not so much. James Vick, maybe done in the UFC, but has a viable career elsewhere. You might look at people who don't have that option. And once you don't, well, then is the next level, what can they do outside of MMA? Where Luke Rockhold has plenty of money and can be a model and all these things. Too bad he can't fight. Who cares? And there are people who have nothing. That kind of goes beyond our scope as pundits, as MMA fans. We don't know what everybody has behind the scenes. Yeah, BJ Penn is from a wealthy family. He'll be fine either way, but mentally the guy doesn't look good. And do you take that into consideration when we talk about the year? Is it just in fighting or in life?
I guess we can close this out with two of the ones that I didn't agree with. And even though I will say Joshua So did a really good job at laying out his concept and, in a way, using your TJ Dillashaw PED use against us, John Jones, I mean, I feel like if you're against John Jones, you want him on the list because you're against John Jones. However, the guy still dominated every fighter that he really brought into the cage with him. Did he do it in ways we've expected to see from John Jones in the past? No. Is he fighting the talent level he had in the past? Probably not. But, he was going through some, surefire Hall of Famers before. So I get there's a lot of public dislike against John Jones, but I'm sorry. You can't walk into the year with a championship, defend it all the way through, and then just because I don't like you personally, or because I think that outside the octagon you've been a jerk, I can't just tell you that you're the worst fighter of 2019.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. You got to separate yourself. You always do, between my opinion of someone as a human being and my opinion of someone as a fighter. And those are two different things. As a human being, of course, you can feel free to dislike John Jones, Colby Covington, all you want. You can't deny John Jones was a champion at the beginning of the year, is a champion now. Of course, didn't have a great performance against Thiago Santos. One bad performance that you win does not constitute worst fighter of the year. I just don't see that logic.
I am so glad you said the name, because I was really, really shocked when it comes down to people just not liking someone. I was so surprised someone did not mention, and just to put a cap on this, we're recording this at 9 o'clock at night on January 9th. I was shocked somebody did not mention Colby Covington. I mean, he has the brawl against Lawler, but then he goes through, basically props himself up as a champion when he wasn't. He gets, I don't want to say dominated, but late round finish against Kamaru, has the whole issue with his jaw. It was a rough year for him. I feel like if you're going to paint John Jones in that light, you can easily paint Colby in that light too.
But I think both are unreasonable. Yeah,
agreed.
You could surprise nobody brought it up. Colby Covington had really a great year if you think about it. The amount of headlines he got, the press he got, a fight of the year, in my opinion. It's pretty much him, Kamaru Usman, and Israel Adesanya, Kelvin Gastelum. Those are the two front runners to me. I thought Colby Covington versus Kamaru Usman was fight of the year, and I forget what you think about him as a human being and his shtick and his act and all that stuff. Man, that was an amazing fight, and he really did have a great year. If he had won that fight, here's my question that we're going to end with: if Colby Covington defeats Kamaru Usman and ends up being welterweight champion, is he fighter of the year to you?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Just because, you look at, like we talked about before when we went through the fighter of the year, I put a lot of value and a lot of weight into who you beat and when you beat them. You're talking about beating two guys that are probably in the Hall of Fame, and Kamaru, you're talking a guy in his prime. What Kamaru's done is pretty spectacular. I don't know that it's respected as much as it should be, given where we are. But we do have one more, actually, to talk about. And if somebody goes back and wants to listen to our podcast or our breakdown of UFC 244, I can see, I guess, where Kevin Lee makes this list, because we were pretty harsh on Kevin Lee coming into UFC 244 against a great wrestler in Gregor Gillespie. Pretty much had put himself all online, in and out of weight classes. But when he had to show up, he literally sat Gregor Gillespie down. And I can't take somebody that has one of the highlight knockouts of the year, to probably spoil another show that we've been asked to do, and say, hey, this guy had one of the worst performances. He could have been, if he loses that fight to Gregor, he probably is relatively high on this list, because you've been ushered at pretty much out of 3 weight divisions in a year and a half. So I just didn't see where I could fit him into this. And I don't really care too much for Kevin Lee and his whole shtick either, but that was another difficult one for me to see onto the list.
The Gregor Gillespie win put him back on the map. 100%. He loses that, he's in big trouble. And not only did he win, he absolutely dominated. Obviously, got the stoppage win early, and fantastic performance by him. That puts him in a great position with great momentum at the end of the year.
Saving grace. That was definitely a saving grace for him.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, for sure.
As you had mentioned in the beginning, and I will echo the sentiment, we put these up and we don't know what the result is going to be. So, for the 2,000 plus people that watched it, for the, 70 people that left comments on that, we promised you we would go back and revisit them. And obviously, thank you so much for the BJ Dillashaw, which I'm embarrassed, quite frankly, neither of us thought of, Jimmy.
That is awesomeness. And I appreciate you so much. You guys are awesome.
We appreciate you guys checking this out, and we promise we will be back very shortly with more commentary.